Welcome to Mixtape Theology. I'm one of the hosts, Rachel Cash. I want to briefly introduce the podcast episode you're about to hear. You are listening to part 1 of 2 episodes with special guest Michael Card. In this first episode, he inspires and challenges us with the thoughts from his latest book, The Nazarene, 40 Devotions on the Lyrical Life of Jesus. In The Nazarene and in this episode, Mr. Card prompts us to engage with the lyrics from his songs as we explore the life of Jesus in the 4 Gospels. If you'd like to win a copy of The Nazarene, simply head on over to our website, mixtapetheology.com, and sign up for our email updates by March 31st, 2021. And now, part 1.
Welcome to Mixtape Theology. This is Dr. Ashley Mofield, and I'm so glad that you have joined us today for this Mixtape Theology podcast. Here at Mixtape Theology, we like to look at 90s contemporary Christian music and dig into the theology of some of our favorite songs, even pick at the culture from time to time and have fun with that. And today is a special day as I am honored and privileged to welcome Mr. Michael Card. Michael, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
You know, just a little bit of your bio. You've got a career that spans 30 plus years, have recorded over 31 albums, authored or co-authored over 24 books, hosted a radio program, written for a wide range of magazines. You are an award-winning musician and performing artist. And of course, you know, I guess everyone would say your most well-known song, El Shaddai, of course, a Dove Award-winning song, and written great songs, Emmanuel. I can think of God's Own Fool is one of my favorites, and Joy in the Journey, so many songs. And then you've been doing a lot of book writing. Some of your books you've written, Scribbling in the Sand, A Fragile Stone, Inexpressible, A Violent Grace, The Parable of Joy. Mr. Card is a graduate of Western Kentucky University with a bachelor's and master's degree in biblical studies. And I know you're doing mentoring for younger artists and musicians, teaching courses on the creative process and calling the Christian recording industry into deeper discipleship. Just for our listeners, at Mixtape Theology, we really do seek to dig into the theology of a lot of our favorite music. And you, in my lifetime, as I have watched your music, you've kind of set the bar for that. I say all that is just you have, in a lot of ways, without realizing it, discipled me. So I really appreciate your ministry in music. I'm thankful for that. And today, specifically, I want to talk about your most recent project, The Nazarene, the lyrical life of Jesus. And so I was able to read the devotion and loved it. What was your goal as you began to write this devotional? Was it something that had kind of been in the back of your mind through years of writing all these songs? Or did one day you think, hey, I should do a devotional off of a bunch of my songs? You know, what was the genesis of that?
Well, the first book I ever wrote was a series of essays based on song lyrics. A woman named Janet Toma at Thomas Nelson went to a conference and just as an aside, I said that, you know, my favorite part of writing music is studying to write music, studying, you know, boring academic articles and things like that. And so I said at one point, I have all this other information besides just the songs. And so she approached me, and this was 30 years ago, and said, you know, let's try to write a book together. So I wrote a book called Emmanuel. I think that's the first book I ever did. And it's essays based on song lyrics. And the way it works, it's actually a pretty nifty way of writing essays. You know, you research the biblical passage that the song's on. You write the song, which means you engage with the passage at sort of a different level with your imagination. And then you go around the country and you play it and you're introducing it. And as you introduce it, you come up with more ideas. And then, so by the time you sit down and write the essay, there's really not that much work to do. You've done all the work. So this is 40 essays from the last 4 albums on the life of Jesus, one on each one of the Gospels. So I get who's the Gospel, who's Matthew, who's Mark, and that sort of thing, and then look at one of my big interests is the different voices of the different Gospels. The fact that Mark is interested in things that Matthew isn't interested in, and the way they nuance things and the way their language is different. They have different favorite words and things like that. That sort of stuff really fascinates me. So that's all wrapped up in this book.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. You know, as a pastor, even teaching people on Gospels, and sometimes people will ask about why is this in this Gospel, and why, or why did Matthew say this differently than Mark, and why was this not included? And I've often used the analogy of someone witnessing an automobile accident, and 3 or 4 of us and we're all witnessing the same thing, but bringing out what we saw from a different perspective. And so that, I guess, was kind of your goal in going through some of those.
Right. And it's not that complicated. There's about maybe a half a dozen distinctives of each one of the Gospels, and you learn those things, and you'll hear a verse and you'll say, well, that sounds like Luke. If it's about someone's amazed, well, that's Luke. If it's somebody misunderstanding Jesus, that's John almost every time. And I find that sort of thing really interesting. Mark isn't interested so much in what Jesus says. He's interested in what he does. So Jesus only talks for 20 minutes in the Gospel of Mark. He talks for 2 hours in Matthew. And those sorts of things I find really fascinating. And as you said, these are different people who are bearing witness to the same event, but they just have different perspectives. And if you believe the Bible's perfect, like we do, that's part of its perfection. Those differences are part of its perfection.
That's awesome. That is great. Yeah, absolutely. And as I was reading the devotions, you do a really good job in taking those stories of Jesus, but helping someone see him as a real person who lived the earth. We know Jesus is fully God and fully man, but it's easy even for a Christian to forget, like, he really was real, and these really were his experiences. And what can we learn thinking about him as a real person? And, yes, the theology of his life, death, and resurrection, and then how others interacted with him. It's not just a mythical figure with some neat stories to live by. I mean, this was a real person. Right.
He's dealing with, Hebrews says he's tempted in every way just as we are. So he's dealing with temptation. He's hungry. He's tired. It takes one of the interesting details of his life for me is because he goes to Jerusalem 3 and sometimes 4 times a year, Galilee. He spends 3 months out of every year walking back and forth to Jerusalem. I mean, that to me that was a stunning idea. A rabbi in Jerusalem actually taught me that. And, you close up the carpenter shop 3 months a year, you walk, a week, 10 days down to Jerusalem, you spend 10 days there, and then you walk back. And you do that 3 times a year. It's pretty phenomenal. He lives an ordinary life each every day. He has to deal with the foibles of people who don't understand him. No one understands him. John the Baptist, who knew who he was from his mother's womb, at one point says, "Are you the Messiah? Should we look for someone else?" His own mother and brothers are offended by him. They think he's out of his mind, want to take him away from the crowd. So he's a real person who's dealing with the exact sort of stuff that we have to deal with. Only he's perfect.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but I teach this a lot, but then we follow his example. And what did he do? He listened to, what his father said, and he spent time and like, that's how we make it through, he was our example.
Right.
So now we go to him. The Nazarene 40 devotions on the lyrical life of Jesus. What do you mean by the phrase, the lyrical life of Jesus?
Well, in a broad sense, I just mean it's poetic and it's beautiful. in one sense, there's a structure to his life that's noble. I think Lyrical in general, I just mean it's beautiful, but there's a depth of his life, I think, that you only really understand from writing songs about it. I mean, Philippians 2:6-11 is a song that someone wrote about the incarnation. And I think the reason Paul includes it, I don't think Paul wrote it. He doesn't strike me as a terribly musical person, but I think the reason he includes that song is there's a degree to which you can only understand Jesus' incarnation through a lyric. It's like lyrics do something different than just, preaching or teaching.
Yeah, I agree. My daughter is a second grader, and she has to memorize Bible verses for school every week. And my wife is amazing at making little melodies with every verse every week. Yep. And it's amazing how, like, the little songs gets us thinking about it, and we sing it in the car, right. and it's not just, it's a weekly practice for us. So, right. And so scripture becomes.
And very, very biblical. I mean, we have acrostic songs like 119. Little Jewish boys and girls, they learn their ABCs by singing those psalms. Each line starts a letter of the Hebrew Bible. So it's not a new idea. It's a very old idea. But Socrates says that when your soul hears music, it lets down its best guard. So music has a sort of an entree into your brain that other things just don't have.
Yeah. Talking about this, here's a quote from the book. You said it, referring to Jesus's life, often rhymed beautifully, but sometimes it reverberated with a discord that in the end was still a meaningful resonance. So where are you getting at with that discord leading to a meaningful resonance?
Well, there are things about his life that we still don't understand. There are things that he says and does. I think one of the best examples is in Luke, where he tells his disciples to sell their coats and buy swords. I still don't think we really understand what that means. Maybe he meant literal swords. I don't know. A lot of people interpret it that way. Some people interpret it that, that sword is a symbol for the Bible. But I don't think he would tell them to sell their coats and buy Bibles. They didn't really have Bibles that you could buy at that day anyway. So anyway, all that is to say, there are things that he says and does that we still don't understand. And I actually think that's kind of cool. He's not this person that we haven't squeezed his life dry and distilled it and even, sometimes even more troubling are the things that he said that we understand. Like, you can't be my disciple unless you pick up your cross and follow me every day. If you think very long about what that really means, that's a fairly frightening thing for him to have said. The nature of his call, I think, is disturbing. The call of Jesus is not an invitation. It's a command. And I think you see that in the response to the disciples. Jesus says to Peter, "Follow me." And he drops his nets and walks away. He says to Matthew, "Follow me." Matthew stands up from his tax table and walks away. So that wasn't an invitation where you go, I'm going to get back. I'll go home and ask my wife if it's a good idea. I'll get back to you on that sort of thing. So the fact that his call is a command, I think is fairly unsettling, because you respond or not. You'd see the only choices he leaves you with are yes or no. There's no middle ground. My mentor, William Lane, used to talk about the disturbing presence of Jesus. There are people that are clearly, they ask him to leave their town because they're afraid of him. He disturbs them. And that's a side of him that I don't think people talk enough about.
Yeah. So here's just kind of a side question. So you write these devotions off songs that you've either written or co-written. If someone doesn't know these songs, I already know the answer to this, my opinion of it, but would they still benefit from the devotion? Do they have to know the Michael Card Library of Music to enjoy the devotions?
No, hopefully not. I think that would be a huge weakness if that was the case. No, what I hope through this particular book is that you you can read the lyric is there, which is almost kind of a poem, but lyrics aren't really poems either. But you read the poem or the lyric, and then you read the essay, and then if you really want to pursue it, you can go on iTunes or Spotify or whatever and listen to the song. And what I'm trying to do, Ashley, is bring together people that are readers and listeners. I've been doing that for most of my time doing this. There are people who are readers who don't really listen to music, and there are lots of music listeners who don't read books. And I don't know if I'm not so sure I've ever accomplished it, but I still think it's a cool thing to try to do.
Is it more challenging to write a book or a song?
Books are way easier to write than songs are.
Really?
I think I'm done writing songs. I mean, the what a song takes out of you is at least what it takes out of me. Every song I've ever finished, I think when I finished it, I would whisper to myself, I'm never going to do that again. It's kind of like having a baby. When you're done, right? You know, when you're in the delivery room, you're thinking, well, I'm never going to do that again. But a book is, a longer period of time. You have a blank page. It doesn't have to fit to a melody and have structure and all that kind of stuff. And I really enjoy writing books, but I think I'm done writing songs. It's too much work. I've written 450. I think that's enough.
Yeah. That's amazing. Just thinking about that alone. And how many books now? Did I say in your bio 24?
27.
27.
It was 27 or 28 now, I think.
Okay. One of the things I liked about the Nazarene as I would read the lyrics of the songs, which many times did read like a poem, even if you didn't know the song, and then you would dig into kind of where the lyrics were headed, and it was a particular perspective or something to learn about Jesus. And so very informational, but then a lot of times when you read a devotion, what's that transformational aspect? Now, what am I supposed to do with this information? And you made that really simple in that at the end of each devotion, you would have a little closing section that would say lyric note, and you would highlight one particular lyric. Now, in songs, sometimes you'll have the hook. I don't know that necessarily that was always the hook of the song, but maybe just the lyric that you wanted to bring out. Possibly the transformational idea of what should you be left with after learning more about the life of Jesus. That's at least the way I saw it as I read the devotion.
Yeah, I think just in general, what you're trying to get people to do, I mean, you as a preacher and me as a songwriter, what we're trying to get people to do is engage with their imaginations. And I think that little lyrical note at the end of all the essays was just a help for that. So you've just read this essay. What was it about the lyric that at least I found the most important thing or the key or whatever? And that's just a little help. I hope it helps and doesn't block people from engaging in their own way. But it's me engaging with the lyric and saying, well, this is the verse I think is the most important.
Sure. Yeah. Some of my favorites at the end of the devotion on his humanity. You talked about the lyric that you left everyone with was his mind sees each soul he will redeem. And that you start thinking about that, and that's a thought you can kind of engage with throughout your whole day. And I loved
the possibility the possibility that as he is hanging on the cross, you and I actually went through his mind, the people that he was doing that for. And I think there's a very good possibility that happened.
Yeah. And how humbling is that idea? And I loved, let's see, I loved in the beginning of the gospel, you're talking about Mark, lyric note at the end of that devotion, and the answer of all answers, you are the Christ. And you're kind of dealing with Peter's confession of faith. Who do people say that I am? Who do you say that I am? And I began to really think through that. I mean, that's that's something that every person needs to engage with. Like, who do you say that Jesus is? We know what Peter thinks.
Yep. Yeah, I think he asks us that. I mean, in one sense, his presence is this. He demands that we respond. Okay, this is who I say I am. This is who I think I am. That's what I'm preaching on this Sunday. Who does Jesus think he is? But at some point, you respond with the way Peter responded, and so billions of other people have responded. I believe, I think, I trust, I hope that you are who you say you are, and that you're God's son, and that all of the promises that you're making to me are really true. And the really amazing thing is that we accept that, and we receive absolutely free, absolutely not doing nothing but believing. We get everything. He gives us everything, and I don't have to be good from that point. I don't have to do this many devotions or read my Bible every day or pray or whatever. I mean, I'm nothing is required of me but that I love him and that I believe. Of course, then when you love him and you believe him, all those things happen.
Exactly.
but
that is my theology as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll mention one more devotion that was one of my particular favorites. You had the one where Jesus, you walk in the lonely places. And that one stuck out to me. I can tell you, there was years ago, I transitioned from being a youth pastor to a pastor, and God, during that transition and my prayer time and really struggling with that call, I kept stumbling upon this idea that Jesus was often walking in lonely places, and God even saying, as a pastor, this is going to be you a lot of days. And,
yes,
and I'm not going to leave you or forsake you, but this isn't always going to be easy.
Yep.
And that devotion was meaningful to me. And even just, and the lyric was, and in my darkest hours, I call upon your name, O Lord, and you come into the solitude of what I cannot face alone. Just even for me as a pastor, man, that's something I have to be reminded of constantly, because we really can feel lonely, as Jesus did. Then realizing we're not alone.
I mean, that's one of the most important things to understand about his character, that he suffered everything we've suffered. He struggled with every temptation we struggle with, yet he was without sin. And so, I mean, I think the garden is one of those places where you see him struggling with the perceived absence of God. And you see him struggling with God's will. It's basically in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus says, I know what you want me to do, and I don't want to do it. I know that this cup is here, and guess what? I don't want to drink it, because he knows in every detail what he's about to experience. And the great triumph is obviously when he says, not what I want, but what you want. And that's, becomes our pattern. It's not what I want. It's what you want.
That is great. There was a theme, a lot of your music in the early years, there was a lot of lamenting. You would talk about suffering a lot. And was that intentional? Was that a place you were where you were in your own life, and just seeing that in scripture?
It wasn't a place where I was. It was a place where people around me were. My sister lost two infants in a 13-month period. My brother lost his 18-year-old son to cancer. My best friend and a guy who had been a pastor to me died on the same day, and were buried on the same day. So all of that happened within, 5-6 month period. And again, I don't think it was me that was suffering so much, but I was watching people suffering and asking God all these questions, and I was seeing that need. I think, as a pastor, this, you shape your sermons around needs in the community. People are struggling with things, and you try to address that. And I think that's what happened with those songs. I just tried to write something that might help. And my favorite song of all the songs I've written, my favorite song is a song called "Come Lift Up Your Sorrows." And one of the things I learned from watching my friends and my family suffer is that what you're supposed to do with your suffering and your confusion, even your anger with God, is you're supposed to offer those things up as an act of worship. And we always go back to the life of Jesus. At the moment in Jesus' life when he's most being used by God, what is he doing? He's lamenting, and his lament, why have you forsaken me? He's in the confusion and the suffering of the cross. But what does he do? He takes that confusion and that suffering and he offers it up as an act, as a sacrificial act. And he saves the world. He, pays for the sins of the world. I do believe, I don't know how dogmatic I would be about this, but I do believe that because of Jesus, our sufferings can be redemptive in that way. I think, I know that because I've seen it happen before. Someone suffers and they don't waste their suffering. They offer that suffering up to God. And it has a huge impact on the people who witness that.
Yeah. I think I could see even my own life in ministry, the things that I went through as a teenager and somebody walking through it with me and show me Jesus. And then you get to the other side and say, hey, Jesus is going to use that. So as you were talking, I was thinking about the beginning of Romans 5, where Paul talking about rejoice in your sufferings because suffering produces perseverance and perseverance character and character produces hope and hope doesn't disappoint us. And so out of the root of that suffering, God's going to turn it into something.
Right.
And you're not going to lose hope in Christ.
I say it this way. When you suffer something like my sister losing her child, or someone suffering with cancer, or whatever, someone struggling with depression, that struggle, that suffering uniquely qualifies you to speak into the life of someone who's suffering the same thing. See, I have 4 healthy children. I've never lost a child, so I can't speak into someone's life the way my sister or my brother, and because they've gone through that suffering and they're uniquely qualified. And I think that I look at Jesus' life and I say the same thing. Jesus is uniquely qualified to speak into our suffering because he suffered the same thing. And, when if you lose a child, you're not going to come to me, for someone who can understand. You're going to find someone who's gone through that same experience. So unfortunately, suffering uniquely qualifies you to speak into the lives of people who are suffering the same thing, which I think is that's a big idea. Idea.
Yeah. And then when you think about God placing us in a local body, God wants to use all to minister to each other through all. Right. Everybody's got different experiences.
Yeah. And those people that have suffered frequently feel like they don't have anything to offer. And that's why I think there's also an encouraging word. No, you can now speak into people's lives that other people can't speak into because you've suffered this particular thing.
Along the lines of the lyrical life of Jesus, it just kind of hit me as you're talking about this. You wrote songs about, poema and chorus of faith, kind of about the lyrical life of us as humans. It's the same idea that you,
right.
And so that's just kind of carrying on because, we've got a song to sing with, the main lyric being Jesus, but what's God doing with your course of faith? So
that's right. That's exactly right.
Well, I want to end this podcast with just sharing the end of one of your devotions. Come to me and drink. And the lyric note for the end of that devotion: with joy you will draw water from salvation's well. You will trust and never be afraid. The Lord will be your strength and song, and you will proclaim and shout out loud and sing for joy the glory of his name. Just this past Sunday, I preached Psalm 51, David's confession after Bathsheba, and we talked about confession and cleansing and then consecration, and just the idea of him experiencing the forgiveness of God, and now he had something to proclaim. And really, that's, as I was reading that devotion, just thinking about how much we have to proclaim. Come and drink and share what's God doing in our hearts and lives, and as we just keep exploring who he is and what he's about. And so thank you, Mike, for through song and through your newest book and helping us do that. There really is joy in the journey. As I thought about that song, you know, a lot of songs that we have kind of become the soundtrack of our lives. You can think of where you were, they're very nostalgic. I was on a college mission trip, and I bet we listened to The Joy and the Journey 100 times, and I can still listen to that song today and go back to a college mission trip and have the same emotions and remembering how God was working. So I want to thank you for just helping provide the soundtrack through a lot of our lives, and God using you in that way. You are a gift to the church, and thank you for being here today and visiting with me in this interview. I really, really appreciate your time.
Thanks. It's really encouraging talking to you. So thanks for spending the time.
Well, guys, this has been Mixtape Theology and our special guest, Mr. Michael Card. And what a blessing it was to be able to talk with him today. I'm going to be giving away a copy of his newest book that we discussed, The Nazarene, The Lyrical Life of Jesus. And if you'd like a chance at getting a copy of this, courtesy of InterVarsity Press, just go to mixtapetheology.com and sign up for our email list, and we'll get you in a drawing for that. Thank you for being here, and we will be excited to see you again very soon at one of our podcasts or on social media. Be blessed, everyone.